She sewed a coat for a foul-smelling, wounded man. Days later, he saved the village from a massacre. The needle pierced through the thick leather with a satisfying pop, each stitch binding more than just fabric together. Martha's calloused fingers worked methodically in the dim candlelight, unaware that she was threading together the fate of every soul in Copper Creek. Outside, the October wind howled through the gaps in her cabin walls, carrying with it the scent of approaching winter and something else she couldn't quite place, something that made her stomach clench with inexplicable dread. 3 days earlier, she had found him collapsed against her woodshed, more dead than alive. The stranger's clothes hung in blood-soaked tatters, his body bearing wounds that spoke of violence beyond anything Martha had witnessed in her 40 years. Most disturbing was the smell that clung to him, not just the metallic tang of blood or the sourness of infection, but something deeper, more primitive. It reminded her of the cave where she once found a bear's winter den, thick with musk and the promise of sleeping death. Now, as she worked by lamplight to fashion him a new coat from her late husband's winter gear, Martha couldn't shake the feeling that she was preparing armor for a war she didn't understand. The leather was tough, meant for harsh winters and harder men, but her needle found its rhythm. Outside, her 18-year-old nephew Jake chopped firewood with the determined intensity of youth, each strike of his axe echoing through the valley like a countdown to something inevitable. The stranger had barely spoken since she dragged him inside. When consciousness flickered behind his pale eyes, he would mumble fragments of words that sounded like warnings, his fever-cracked lips forming shapes around names Martha didn't recognize. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, his eyes stayed open, watching her work with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Martha had sewn countless garments in her lifetime, quilts for newborns, wedding dresses for blushing brides, burial shrouds for the departed. But this coat felt different under her fingers. Each stitch seemed to pulse with purpose, as if the leather itself understood its destiny. She had chosen the heaviest hide from her husband's collection, the kind that could turn a knife blade or deflect a bullet if luck favored the wearer. The cabin creaked around them, settling into the night like an old man's bones. Through the single window, Martha could see Jake's lantern bobbing near the woodpile, his young frame silhouetted against the darkness that seemed to press closer with each passing hour. She had raised the boy since his parents died of fever 2 summers back, and now he was all the family she had left in this unforgiving land. The stranger's breathing changed, becoming deeper, more controlled. When Martha glanced up from her work, she found him studying her with eyes that seemed older than his weathered face suggested. There was something in his gaze that made her think of winter wolves, patient, calculating, utterly dangerous. She returned to her stitching, pulling the thread tight. The coat was nearly finished now, its bulk filling her lap like a sleeping animal. The stranger had been tall, she remembered from carrying him inside, broad across the shoulders in the way of men who lived by violence. The garment would fit him well, she thought, though she couldn't say why that knowledge filled her with such unease. Outside, Jake's axe fell silent. Martha paused in her work, listening to the night sounds that filtered through the cabin walls. An owl called from the distant pines, its voice carrying across the valley like a funeral song. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote answered, then another, until the hills echoed with their wild chorus. The stranger stirred on his makeshift bed, pushing himself up on his elbows despite the obvious pain it caused him. His voice, when it came, was rough as sandpaper, but carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You should leave tonight," he said, his words cutting through the cabin's warmth like a blade through silk. "Take the boy and ride south. Don't stop until you reach the territorial line." Martha's needle paused mid-stitch. In the lamplight, the stranger's face seemed carved from granite, all sharp angles and hard planes. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against his sun-darkened skin. She had noticed it while tending his wounds, along with others that spoke of a life lived on the edge of violence. "This is my home," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. I don't run from shadows and whispers." The stranger's laugh held no humor. "These aren't shadows coming for Copper Creek, ma'am. They're flesh and blood, and they kill everything in their path." Through the window, Martha could see Jake approaching the cabin, his arms full of split wood. The boy moved with the easy confidence of youth, unaware that death might be riding toward them through the mountain passes. She thought of her husband, buried on the hill behind their home, and wondered if she would join him before another sunrise painted the eastern peaks. The stranger watched her face, reading something in her expression that made him nod slowly. "You're thinking about staying and fighting. That's noble thinking, but it'll get you and the boy killed." Martha tied off her thread and held up the finished coat. The garment was magnificent in its simplicity, heavy leather reinforced with metal studs, cut long enough to protect the wearer's legs while riding. She had sewn it with all the skill her years had taught her, every stitch placed with the precision of a woman who understood that shoddy work could mean the difference between life and death. "Why should I trust a man whose name I don't even know?" she asked, folding the coat across her lap. The stranger was quiet for so long that Martha wondered if he had slipped back into unconsciousness. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of old pain and older regrets. "Name's Cole Brennan. Used to ride with the 7th Cavalry before I found out what kind of orders they were giving us. Now I hunt the men who gave those orders, and they hunt me back." Martha had heard whispers of Cole Brennan around frontier towns, stories that painted him as everything from a cold-blooded killer to a vengeful angel. Looking at him now, broken and bleeding on her cabin floor, he seemed painfully human. But there was something in his eyes that spoke of depths she couldn't fathom, currents of purpose that ran darker and deeper than she cared to explore. Jake's footsteps crunched through the snow outside, and Martha heard him stamp his boots clean before entering. The boy pushed through the door with his arms full of wood, his cheeks red from the cold and his breath forming clouds in the suddenly frigid air. "Storm's coming in fast, Aunt Martha," he said, dumping the wood beside the fireplace. "Sky's gone that ugly green color, and the wind's picking up something fierce." Cole struggled to sit up, his face contorting with pain. "Not a storm, boy. Riders. 20, maybe 25 of them coming hard from the North Pass." Jake dropped the last piece of wood, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle that hung above the mantelpiece. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because I've been running from them for 3 days, Cole replied, accepting the coat that Martha handed him. He pulled it on with obvious difficulty, the heavy leather settling around his shoulders like armor. "They're led by a man named Voss, Captain Marcus Voss of the Territorial Militia. He's got orders to clean out every settlement between here and the Colorado line." Martha felt the blood drain from her face. She had heard the name Voss whispered in the trading posts and saloons, always followed by stories of burned homesteads and unmarked graves. The territorial government claimed he was restoring order to the frontier, but the survivors told different stories if there were any survivors to tell them. The coat fit Cole perfectly, as Martha had known it would. Beneath the heavy leather, she could see the outline of healing wounds, the careful way he held his left arm to protect damaged ribs. Whatever had happened to him in those mountain passes, it had been brutal enough to nearly kill him. Yet here he sat, preparing to face his hunters again. "Why are you telling us this?" Jake asked, his young voice cracking slightly. "What's in it for you?" Cole tested the movement of his shoulders, nodding approval at the coat's construction. "Your aunt saved my life. Where I come from, that creates a debt." "Debt or not," Martha said firmly, "you're in no condition to fight anyone." Cole's smile was sharp as a knife blade. "Ma'am, I've been fighting since I was younger than your nephew there. Condition doesn't enter into it when you're protecting something worth protecting." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin shutters and sending snow swirling past the window. Martha could feel the temperature dropping, the kind of bitter cold that made metal brittle and men desperate. If riders were indeed coming through the passes in weather like this, they were either very brave or very motivated. Given what she knew of Captain Voss, She suspected it was the latter. Jake moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "I don't see anything." "You won't," Cole replied, slowly getting to his feet. The coat hung on him like a second skin, transforming him from wounded vagrant to something far more dangerous. "Voss is too smart to come straight up the main trail. He'll circle around, hit the town from 3 sides at once. Classic pincer movement." Martha found herself studying the stranger Cole with new eyes. The way he stood despite his injuries, the casual authority in his voice when discussing military tactics, the scars that decorated his hands and arms like a roadmap of violence. This was not a man who had stumbled into conflict by accident. This was someone who had been forged by it, shaped by it, made into something harder than the mountains themselves. "How long do we have?" she asked. Cole moved to the window, his movements careful but purposeful. Even injured, he moved like a predator, all coiled energy and barely restrained violence. "If they pushed hard through the pass, maybe an hour. 2 at most. An hour." Martha looked around her cabin, at the life she had built with her husband's blood and sweat, at the boy who depended on her for everything. In an hour it could all be ashes and memory. "There's a root cellar," Jake said suddenly. "We could hide there. Wait for them to pass." Cole shook his head. "Voss doesn't leave witnesses, son. He'll burn every building, search every hiding place. Your only chance is to run or fight, and running won't work with this storm coming in." Martha felt something cold settle in her stomach, heavier than fear. She had lived through Indian raids, survived her husband's death, raised a boy in country that killed the weak without mercy. But this felt different. This felt like the end of something. "What about the rest of the town?" she asked. "Shouldn't we warn them?" "Town's already dead," Cole replied flatly. "Voss hit the main settlement first. That's why I was running. Tried to get word out, but they caught me at Devil's Canyon. If your nephew hadn't found me when he did, I'd be buzzard food by now." Jake paled. "You mean everyone?" "The Hendersons, old Tom at the general store?" "Gone," Cole confirmed. "All of them." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Martha had known those people, traded with them, shared meals and stories and the simple human connections that made frontier life bearable. Now they were nothing but memory and ash. Cole continued speaking, his voice cutting through her grief like a surgeon's blade. "But Voss made a mistake. He thinks he got me at the canyon, thinks his secret died with the town. He doesn't know I'm still alive, still able to fight. 1 man against 25? Jake's voice carried the skepticism of youth. "Those aren't fighting odds." Cole's smile was winter cold. "Depends on the man." Martha watched him move around her cabin, testing his mobility, checking the weapons Jake had laid out on the table. His movements were still careful, still pained, but there was a deadly competence in the way he handled her husband's old rifle, examined the cartridges, tested the action. This was a man who understood violence in all its forms. "What's your plan?" she asked. "Simple," Cole replied, not looking up from his weapon inspection. "I'm going to kill them all." The casual way he said it, like discussing the weather or the price of grain, sent ice through Martha's veins. She had seen hard men before, men who killed to survive or protect what was theirs. But there was something different about Cole Brennan, something that went beyond mere necessity into the realm of purpose. "And us?" Jake asked. "You're going to help me." Martha started to protest, but Cole held up a hand. "Not the way you're thinking. I'm not asking the boy to become a killer. But I'll need eyes, need someone who knows every trail and hiding spot in these hills." Outside, the storm was intensifying. Snow whipped against the windows in crystalline sheets, and the wind howled through the pine trees like the voices of the damned. If riders were indeed approaching through this weather, they would be cold, miserable, and eager to finish their work quickly. Cole moved to Martha's sewing basket, pulling out several spools of dark thread. "I need you to do one more thing for me, Ma Am. Think you can sew in this weather?" Martha looked at the thread, confused. "What do you need sewn?" "Pockets," Cole replied, his eyes gleaming in the lamplight. Special pockets sewn into the lining of this coat. I need them placed exactly where I tell you, sized exactly as I specify. For the next 30 minutes, Martha worked by lamplight while Cole directed her with military precision. She sewed hidden compartments into the coat's lining, each one designed to hold specific items that Cole produced from his saddlebags: small glass vials filled with powder, metal cylinders no bigger than her thumb, lengths of fuse that looked like black thread. As she worked, Cole explained his plan. It was simple in concept but terrifyingly complex in execution. He would use the storm as cover, position himself where Voss's men would have to approach in single file, then turn their own tactics against them. The hidden pockets would hold surprises that Martha preferred not to think about too closely. "This is madness," she said as she finished the last pocket. "You're talking about fighting trained soldiers." "I'm talking about fighting murderers," Cole corrected. "There's a difference." Jake had been quiet during the sewing, but now he spoke up. "What if you're wrong? What if they don't come?" Cole was loading cartridges into his rifle, each bullet placed with the care of a man who couldn't afford to waste ammunition. "Then you'll have a new coat and some interesting stories to tell your grandchildren." But even as he spoke, they all heard it. The distant sound of horses moving through snow, muffled by the storm but unmistakably real. Cole's head snapped up, his entire body going still as stone. "They're here," he said simply. Martha felt her heart begin to race. Through the window, she could see nothing but swirling snow and darkness. But somewhere out there, death was riding toward them with military precision and murderous intent. Cole stood, testing the weight of the coat one final time. The hidden pockets were invisible. The modifications Martha had made seamlessly integrated into the garment's original design. He looked like what he was, a dangerous man dressed for war. "Remember what I told you," he said to Jake. "When the shooting starts, you get to the ridge above Miller's Creek. There's an old mining camp up there. Good view of the whole valley. You signal me with the mirror when they try to flank around the north side." Jake nodded, his face pale but determined. Martha felt a surge of fierce pride in the boy, followed immediately by terror at what she was asking of him. "What about me?" she asked. Cole's expression softened slightly. "You've done enough, ma'am. More than enough. This coat ... He touched the leather reverently. "This might just save my life and everyone else's in the county." The sound of horses was getting closer now, still distant but definitely approaching. Martha could picture them in her mind, hard men on hard horses, riding through the storm with vengeance and orders that brooked no mercy. Cole moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "Whatever happens tonight, I want you to know what you did for a stranger. Taking me in, tending my wounds, making this coat, it matters. It all matters." Then he was gone, slipping out into the storm like a ghost made of leather and purpose. Martha rushed to the window, but he had already vanished into the swirling snow, leaving only footprints that the wind was already beginning to erase. Jake appeared at her shoulder, his rifle in his hands. "Think he can really do it? One man against all of them?" Martha thought about the stranger she had found dying in her woodshed, remembered the careful way she had sewn each stitch in his coat, recalled the look in his eyes when he spoke of debt and duty. "I think," she said slowly, "that Captain Voss is about to learn why some debts should never be collected." Outside, the storm raged on, hiding predators and prey in equal measure. But somewhere in that white darkness, a man in a leather coat was preparing to settle accounts that had been too long in the making. Martha pulled Jake close, said a prayer to whatever gods watched over fools and heroes, and waited for the sound of gunfire to split the night. The first shot came exactly 43 minutes later, a sharp crack that cut through the howling wind like lightning splits thunder. Martha jerked upright from where she had been dozing fitfully in her chair, instantly alert. Jake was already at the window, his young face pressed against the frost-covered glass. "I can see muzzle flashes," he whispered, his voice tight with excitement and terror. "Up on the ridge. maybe 300 yards out. Another shot echoed across the valley, then another. Martha could picture Cole out there in the storm, using every shadow and snowdrift for cover, making each bullet count in the way only a man who had learned to kill efficiently could manage. The coat she had sewn would be keeping him warm, keeping him alive, its dark leather helping him blend into the winter night. Jake grabbed his rifle and headed for the door. "I need to get to that signal position." Martha caught his arm. "You be careful, you hear me? Don't try to be a hero." The boy nodded, but she could see the fever of youth burning in his eyes, the desire to prove himself in the crucible of violence that had claimed so many men before him. She kissed his forehead quickly, tasting the salt of her own tears. "Come back to me," she whispered. Then he was gone, slipping out the back door into the storm. Martha was alone with her fear and the distant sound of gunfire that punctuated the night like a deadly heartbeat. The battle raged for over an hour. From her window, Martha could see muzzle flashes blooming like deadly flowers in the darkness, could hear the sharp reports of rifles and the occasional deeper boom of what might have been dynamite. Cole was using everything she had sewn into that coat, turning her humble cabin into a supply depot for a one-man war. Twice she saw riders approaching the main trail, their dark shapes barely visible through the snow. Both times, they retreated quickly after shots rang out from unexpected directions. Cole was moving through the storm like a phantom, striking and vanishing, using tactics that turned the militia's superior numbers into a liability. Martha found herself pacing the cabin floor, her hands working constantly at her skirts in a nervous gesture that reminded her painfully of her husband. He had done the same thing during Indian raids, that constant fidgeting that spoke of energy with no outlet, of the need to act trapped inside the necessity of waiting. A tremendous explosion lit up the northern ridge, the flash visible even through the storm. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder, shaking snow from the cabin's roof and rattling the windows in their frames. Martha held her breath, waiting for some sign that Cole had survived whatever hellish trap he had just sprung. Minutes passed. Then, incredibly, she heard a voice carried on the wind. Cole's voice, raised in what sounded almost like laughter. The sound was so unexpected, so wildly inappropriate to the carnage surrounding it, that Martha found herself smiling despite her terror. More shots followed, but they seemed less organized now, more desperate. Martha began to hope that Cole's impossible plan might actually be working. The man was a devil in human form, she decided, and perhaps that was exactly what the situation required. Jake reappeared near midnight, stumbling through the door with snow caked on his clothes and excitement blazing in his young eyes. "Aunt Martha, you should have seen it." He had them running in circles, picking them off one by one. "That coat you made, it saved his life at least 3 times. I saw bullets bounce right off the leather." Martha grabbed the boy, checking him for wounds with the frantic efficiency of a woman who had learned to fear the worst. "Are you hurt? Did they see you?" "I'm fine," Jake assured her, but his hands were shaking as he set down his rifle. "But Cole, I think he might be in trouble. There's still maybe 8 or 9 of them left, and they've got him pinned down near Devil's Creek. That's where Captain Voss is making his stand." Martha felt her heart sink. She had sewn protection into that coat, had put all her skill and hope into every stitch. But leather could only do so much against determined men with rifles. "We have to help him," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the words. Jake stared at her. "Aunt Martha, what can we do? We're not soldiers." Martha was already moving, pulling her husband's old gun belt from the closet, checking the loads in his pistol. "Maybe not, but I know something about Captain Voss that Cole doesn't." The boy waited while she struggled with the heavy gun belt, finally managing to buckle it around her waist. The weight felt strange, alien, but also somehow comforting. Her husband had worn this same belt through a dozen range wars and cattle disputes, had trusted his life to the weapons it carried. "Voss has a weakness," Martha continued, pulling on her heavy winter coat. "Something I heard from Tom at the general store before. She swallowed hard, pushing away the image of the kindly old man lying dead in his own shop. Voss is terrified of fire. Lost half his men in a grass fire during the Apache campaigns, barely survived himself. Tom said the man goes pale just talking about it. Jake's eyes lit up with understanding. The signal fires, the ones the miners used to use for emergencies. Martha nodded. There's still dried brush and oil-soaked timbers up at the old camp. If we could get a fire started big enough, visible enough, it might spook Voss into making a mistake, Jake finished. Give Cole the opening he needs. They were both quiet for a moment, contemplating the magnitude of what they were considering. Going out into that storm, into a battlefield where trained killers were hunting each other through the darkness, was tantamount to suicide. But the alternative was listening to Cole die alone in the snow while they cowered in safety. Martha thought about the stranger she had found bleeding in her woodshed, remembered the care with which she had sewn his coat, recalled the way he had spoken of debt and honor. Some things, she decided, were worth risking everything for. Get the oil from the shed, she told Jake. I'll gather the matches and kindling. They worked quickly, efficiently, their movements coordinated by shared purpose and desperation. Within minutes, they had assembled everything they would need to turn the old mining camp into a beacon that could be seen for miles. The trek up to the ridge was a nightmare of wind and snow and treacherous footing. More than once, Martha stumbled and nearly fell, saved only by Jake's strong young arm and her own stubborn determination. The sound of gunfire continued sporadically from Devil's Creek, each shot a reminder that Cole was still alive, still fighting. The mining camp was exactly as she remembered it, a collection of rotting timbers and abandoned equipment slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness. But the materials were still there, still dry enough under their covering of snow to burn if properly encouraged. Jake worked with the intensity of youth while Martha stood watch, her husband's pistol heavy in her gloved hand. The boy piled timber and brush with scientific precision, creating a structure designed to burn hot and bright and fast. When he was satisfied, he doused the entire construction with oil, the sharp smell cutting through the cold air like a promise of warmth. Ready, he said simply. Martha struck the match, watched the tiny flame flicker in the wind, then carefully touched it to an oil-soaked rag. The fire caught instantly, racing up the kindling with hungry enthusiasm. Within moments, the entire pile was ablaze, sending flames 20 feet into the storm-torn sky. The effect was immediate and dramatic. From their position on the ridge, Martha could see the fire reflecting off the low-hanging clouds, creating an orange glow that was visible for miles in every direction. More importantly, she could see movement down in the valley, dark shapes breaking from cover, running in obvious panic. It's working, Jake breathed. The gunfire from Devil's Creek intensified suddenly, becoming a steady roar of violence that echoed off the canyon walls. Martha could picture Cole taking advantage of the confusion, pressing his attack while his enemies were distracted by their own primal fears. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the shooting stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any amount of gunfire. Martha and Jake stood beside their signal fire, straining their ears for any sound that might tell them who had survived the night's carnage. The flames crackled and hissed, consuming their fuel with mechanical efficiency, but from the valley below came nothing but the endless whisper of falling snow. Maybe we should go down there, Jake suggested, his voice small in the vast darkness. Martha shook her head. We wait. If Cole won, he'll signal us. If he didn't, she left the sentence unfinished, unable to voice the possibility that the man she had saved might have died despite all their efforts. They waited 20 minutes before they saw it, a single muzzle flash from the direction of Devil's Creek, followed by 2 more in rapid succession. 3 shots, evenly spaced, exactly as Cole had told Jake to signal if the battle was won. Martha felt her knees go weak with relief. He did it. Dear God, he actually did it. Jake was already kicking snow onto their signal fire, reducing it to smoldering embers that would not attract unwanted attention. We should get back to the cabin. He'll be looking for us there. The trip down from the ridge was easier, their path lit by the dying glow of the fire and their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they had somehow survived the night. Martha found herself thinking about the coat she had sewn, wondering how many bullet holes would need patching, how much blood would need washing from the leather. Cole was waiting for them when they reached the cabin, slumped in Martha's chair like a man who had reached the absolute limit of his endurance. The coat hung open, revealing fresh bloodstains on his shirt, but he was alive and conscious and even managed a weary smile when they entered. "That was some fire," he said, his voice hoarse from shouting commands and breathing gun smoke. "Scared them worse than a cavalry charge." Martha moved immediately to examine his wounds, her practiced hands finding new injuries beneath the leather. "How bad are you hurt?" "Nothing fatal," Cole assured her, though his face was pale with blood loss. "Your coat saved my life more times than I can count. Voss put 3 bullets into my chest, but the leather turned them all." Jake was practically bouncing with excitement. "What happened to Voss? Did you get him?" Cole's expression darkened. "He ran when the fire started, left his men to die while he saved his own skin. But he won't get far in this storm. The territorial governor will want to know why his star captain abandoned a mission and got his entire command killed." Martha finished her examination, satisfied that Cole's new wounds were painful but not life-threatening. "So it's over?" "This part is," Cole confirmed. "But there will be others like Voss, other men with orders to clean out the frontier. The territory wants this land, and they don't much care who they have to kill to get it." He struggled to his feet, testing his mobility with the careful movements of a man who understood his own limitations. The coat hung perfectly on his frame, its weight distributed exactly as Martha had intended. Even battered and blood-stained, it looked like it belonged on him. "I'll be moving on come morning," he said. "Can't stay in one place too long, not with the kind of enemies I've made." Martha felt a sharp pang of loss, though she couldn't say exactly why. "Where will you go?" "South, maybe. Or west toward California. Doesn't much matter, as long as it's away from here." Cole paused, seeming to wrestle with something internal. "I want you both to know. What you did tonight made all the difference. That fire, the distraction it caused. I couldn't have won without it." Jake puffed up with pride, but Martha simply nodded. She had done what needed doing, nothing more and nothing less. That was how survival worked on the frontier. You helped when you could, you fought when you had to, and you tried not to think too hard about the cost. Cole moved to the door, then stopped and turned back. "The coat," he said simply. "I'll treasure it always. Not just because it saved my life, but because of what it represents, the kindness of strangers, the courage of ordinary people, the idea that some debts are worth paying no matter the cost." Then he was gone, vanishing into the pre-dawn darkness like a ghost made of leather and legend. Martha stood at her window, watching until even his footprints had been erased by the wind. Jake appeared at her shoulder. "Think we'll ever see him again?" Martha touched the glass where Cole's image had disappeared, feeling the cold seep through the thin barrier that separated warmth from wilderness. "Maybe. Men like him have a way of turning up when they're needed most." Outside, the storm was finally beginning to break. Through the gaps in the clouds, Martha could see the first pale hints of sunrise painting the eastern peaks. It would be a clear day, she realized, perfect for new beginnings and second chances. She moved away from the window, beginning the familiar routines of morning, stoking the fire, preparing breakfast, tending to the endless small tasks that kept life moving forward. But her eyes kept drifting to the chair where Cole had sat, to the bloodstains on her floor that marked where she had sewn salvation into leather and thread. Somewhere out there in the growing light, a man was riding toward whatever destiny awaited him, protected by a coat that carried not just the warmth of its material, but the love and hope of the woman who had made it. Martha smiled, picked up her sewing basket, and began preparing for whatever the new day might bring. Some debts, she reflected, were indeed worth paying. And some stitches, once made, bound more than just fabric together. They connected hearts across the vast distances of the frontier, creating ties stronger than blood and more enduring than time itself.